Welcome to our Research Like a Pro with DNA Q&A series. Should I cite a source from my files or the now digitized version? This is such a great question. I think it's something that comes up every time we are working with research that we did years ago. So the question came in as this. Sometimes documents are now digitized and found online many years after a researcher has found the same document. If you have a document in your possession, but the same document can be found online, which document should you cite? Okay, this is a great question. And I have some different things to think about, some different examples as we go through this. So first of all, let's talk about the places where we actually do cite our sources. When we start a project for the first time, or maybe return to it, we take a look at our timeline and we want to add all of our sources that we have previously found, and we put those into our timeline. And it may be that you find a document that's now readily available online. A good example of this would be census records. I know back in the day, I printed off all the censuses and put those in file folders, and now they are all available online and they're attached to my trees. And so I'm throwing away those old printed copies of census records, unless perhaps you went to a lot of work on your printed copy of a census record and you have a lot of annotations and you had a lot of extra information. In that case, you would probably want to copy that all down somewhere, make sure you have it, then throw that away. But you would be citing the source, the census that's now online, because that's easier for people to find and for you to find. Now, another place we cite sources is in our research report. And we'll look at a couple of ideas about what we should cite in a report. We also cite our sources in an online tree and in proof arguments that we may write. So in an online tree, we have to stop and think, is there really a reason to cite an old document if it's readily available online? Probably not. Probably best is to attach the records that people can easily click on and go to and view on their own without having to ask you for the document in your files. And with a proof argument, we are taking all of the research and we're putting it together in one document, and we would most likely want to cite the newly digitized source. Now, that said, there might be some scenarios where we maybe would want to cite something that is in our files. So let's just look at a couple of ideas. This is a document that was handed down to me. This is a marriage license and a certificate of marriage that was done in 1942 or 3. It's kind of got an X here and then a 3. And I am thinking that this was probably requested by my great-grandfather, W.H. Schultz. It's his marriage record. And perhaps he needed this for some type of proof. I'm not sure if he was filling out a Social Security application or a driver's license or who knows what. But I'm kind of guessing that perhaps he needed this for something in 1942 or 3. And so he wrote, or telephone perhaps, probably wrote the county of, let's see, what county was this? This was Carter County, Oklahoma, and asked if they had a record of his marriage. And so you can see that the county clerk, Willie Maddox, just had a pre-printed form that he went in and he typed in the appropriate data. And this came down to me through my dad's files. And so this is an interesting little piece of family history, I feel, because I'm still curious about why my great-grandfather requested it. But this one I have saved, and I have a citation for that. And one of the places that maybe you would use this is if you were writing a history of the family, that you have this original document. It's original, it's original derivative, should we say that? Because it is a derivative. It was copied from the original, but it was a request from my great-grandfather. So when I went to write my 4-generation project, and this was one of my generations, I actually used a little bit of writing about this because I wanted to give my background information that the family had this marriage. And so I wrote the family group sheet gives the marriage date for Dora and William as 11 December 1898 in Elmore City, Garvin County, Oklahoma. And then I have a citation to the family group sheet. An official marriage license or certificate was sought to verify this important information. In 1898, Elmore City would have been in the Chickasaw Nation Indian Territory, not Oklahoma. A search of that location resulted in a copy of the original marriage license and certificate. And then I go ahead and discuss how the actual copy, that derivative record, was just a little bit different than the original would show. So at the time, the original marriage record was I wanted to discuss the copy that I had because it was part of my background information. But I was able to go and find the actual marriage record. And I found that the county clerk had thought this was a Rayston, R-A-Y, but in looking at it, I could see how he could determine that was either an A or a Y. And so I discussed that a little bit. And my ancestor was Dora Algae, not Algae Dora or whatever he thought that was. And so I've got two different records for the marriage. I keep both of them in my files, and in my timeline, I use both of those. And in writing a proof argument, I would go with this document because it is from the original marriage book. But in my research report, I could use both of them as I did in my accreditation report. And for family search or ancestry trees, I would just link this record because it makes sense to have the original that anyone could look at, and it's now digitized and they can go view it for themselves. So, some advantages to using digitized versions of sources. Well, they are available for other researchers to consult. You know, it's really difficult for someone to look at your files unless you have digitized and put it online. It places the document in the context of other records. So with the marriage record, the derivative copy, I don't get to see anybody else's records around it. However, with the digitized copy, I can scroll forward, I can scroll backward, I can look at all the different people who are getting married about the same time in the community. And so it gives me an idea of that community. I can also scroll to the beginning of the microfilm on Family Search and see the actual picture of the book that this marriage record came from. So there's a lot of advantages to just using a digitized version of the source. Now, that said, we do need to think about any advantages that there might come from using sources from our files. And one example of this is if the source maybe has some annotations or clarifies information. So here's an example of this. Here is a digitized version of the family Bible record for the John C. Harris family. And these are the births. It's a little bit difficult to read. If you zoom in on it, you really can pretty much read everything. But here's another version of the family Bible that's in my files. And this is a derivative taken from this original. And the notes say that it was by Ruthie M. Harris, and she was a daughter of John C. Harris and his wife, Melissa Welch. And she actually made a lot of different notes. She clarified some of the birth dates. She wrote some notes over here in the margins. She had some different ideas and thoughts about this family that she added. And so this is an important source because it's annotated. Now, would I upload this to Family Search? I certainly could, or I could perhaps just use this to verify. In either case, I would want to put this source into my timeline so that I would remember I have this annotated version as well as the original pages that I got pictures of later. If I had a research report, I could use this source if it was adding some information. And the same with a proof argument. If I was trying to prove something about this family, perhaps the knowledge of this Ruthie that was added to these Bible pages would be valuable. So we always have to stop and think, what extra value does something from our files have, and why would we want to use that over a digitized source? So here's another example about clarifying information from family knowledge. And this is a source that maybe you have inherited or that you filled out yourself, and it's a typical family group sheet. Now, in this case, it's an interesting situation because this is a little bit cut off, but William Henry Kelsey was my second great grandfather, and he had 3 wives, and one of them was named Esther. Well, was she Hester or was she Esther? Family knowledge is that she was Hester with an H, and she had been changed on Family Search on the collaborative family tree to be Esther, and there was a lot of confusion about her first name. When I was going through my mother's files, I found this family group sheet that had a little explanation about how William H. Kelsey married Harriet, then married Hester. And it says, due to dropping of the H, because she was British, her name always sounded like Esta, but it was really Hester with an H. So I love this little annotation that I had. And you see that as I was going through these records and discarding most of these family group sheets because they didn't have any added value, this one I circled in red and said, add this to the family tree so I could correct the information and actually have some basis for using the Hester and not the Esther. And so this is another example of a fun source. I believe I just put this in as a note, but I certainly could have uploaded this as a source and used that. So, the family search family tree versus this handwritten family tree had some additional information. So some takeaways. Consider additional value a filed source, one that you have in your possession, could have over one now digitized. You have to take this by case basis because each instance might be a little bit different. And then consider additional value a now digitized source could have over a file source. And remember that you can do both versions in your timeline. The timeline is for you, and so you can enter both if you like. For a census, I would not enter both. I would just enter the now digitized. For a marriage record that they are just identical, I would do the now digitized version. But if you have a source similar to what I showed you here, perhaps you would want to enter both. So just consider value of each and then consider how you will be using it. So hopefully that helps you to think about what you should be putting into your timeline for sources and using in your research as you're looking at your old records versus newly digitized records.